Alright, so this is going to be another episode of Film Thought. Today's film is Heretic. Tom, what did you think?
Well, um, I liked it. Uh, I enjoyed it. I've got quite a lot to say about it, so I don't know how much I can say in the general thoughts.
Mhm.
But yeah, well, it's a horror, isn't it? And I think it was successful in that it did scare me, it did make me tense, sort of achieved what it was doing. Um, it's one of those films where as it went on and it got more overtly horrific, I was gripped in the moment, so I didn't quite realize that there's a lot of stuff which doesn't
What you
doesn't
think it
quite
doesn't?
make sense in a
Yes.
logical sense. Yes, I mean I'm talking the events and sequences of the film. This
Hmm.
is this is a film which sort of theoretically it discusses a lot. It's a lot of theological discussions, but on a sort of logical step by step what happens in that second half of the film, there's a lot of stuff which just doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
it really falls apart about halfway through, and up until that point, it's really interesting. Yeah, I've got a few major claims I would make about the film and how it would be less poor. Um, yeah, but
okay, well I think I liked it more than you then, because I enjoyed it. I'd say it's a solid film, but it,
I thought you were going to
yeah,
say it's a
it,
solid
it
five. You kind of enjoyed it that much.
no no definitely higher than the five. I think I definitely enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty decent. Um, but it does. There are things which don't make sense in it towards the end. But I was gripped, scared. It worked on an emotional level, so I, I don't really care too much.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, if we, I think it's probably easier instead of running through the whole plot to just sort of
Mhm.
do the main like stages because the plot's not that
Yes.
involved. It's more about the intricacies of the moment.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah.
you're right, yeah.
So the premise is these two Mormon missionaries, these two Mormon women, go to this guy's house to try and convert him. He locks them in the house and then
Mhm.
starts trying to convince them that religion's made up, except for his one true religion. Then he makes them watch a quote unquote miracle, which turns out not to be a miracle, and then kills one of them, and then uh, chases the other one around the house for a bit, and then everyone dies at the end, I think.
Maybe, potentially.
Maybe.
One of them, it's a little bit up in the air. Two of them, pretty definite,
Yeah. So
I
that's
think.
the generalities, but then it's more about the specific way that pans out. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, it is. One thing I like about it is that a lot of horror films, or films in general, they'll do a lot of mucking about at the beginning before they get into what it's really about. This film, about 5 minutes in, maybe 10 minutes, the girls are at Hugh Grant's house, and I quite liked that. It was like, right, we know what you're here for.
Yeah,
We're
we
here for
didn't need
Hugh.
like the
We're
first
just
act of
gonna,
them being Mormon missionaries.
yeah, we
Yeah.
didn't need that, and it didn't do that. It had like 5 minutes, just sort of set up their characters, set up that they're a
Quite well.
bit prudish, and yeah, set it up quite well
Well, it
in
sets up that
just a very short amount of
one
time.
of them's like that, and then the other one is like you know keeps it very much on the down low.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
she's pretty low key, sort of. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
she seems
quite
not quite to have the
reserved.
same level of buy-in as
Yes, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Now here's a question: do you remember either of their names?
Um, yes, I can
Do
remember
you?
both of their names.
Okay, that would be
Yeah.
helpful because I can't.
So Sister Paxton
Yeah,
is
yeah,
the blonde one
yeah,
who's
yeah, yeah,
sort of
yeah.
quite nice, doesn't seem particularly bright,
Mm-hmm,
very
mm-hmm.
much devoted.
And what's the
And
one
then
that
Sister
looks like Wednesday called?
Barnes, Sister Barnes,
Barnes.
and they just call them Sister Paxton and Sister Barnes.
And then what's he called?
Mr. Reed.
Of course, Mr. Reed.
Mr. Reed.
Mr. Reed.
Mr. Reed.
Oh, that was a big cringe moment. I was like, that's well played, because I've heard
Yeah,
someone basically that whole scene I've seen before in real life, and I was like, oh, yeah.
yeah. I quite liked her though. I thought she was cringe in quite a likable
That was
way.
well. I thought she was cringe in a very real. I like it was.
Very real way. Yeah.
It was in universe cringe rather than, out of. We weren't cringing at
Yeah.
the film, cringing at the character.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was yeah. Both of them were really really well. Like I think they maybe have the best characters. So like Paddington had really good character setups in that they're very simple characters, very simple motivations. Here you go.
Yeah.
And that's because the target audience of the film, that makes sense. But I think this had the best setup for who the characters were from the get go. Like both
Yeah,
of their
because
acting and the writing in it was really clear about like who they are, or who they present themselves to be, and who they really are was like really clear in a really like
yeah,
subtle but good way.
yeah. I mean, the two actresses are actually Mormons, which is quite interesting.
I didn't know that. That is interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
perspective. But yeah, it sets them up really well because it gives you a few minutes before, 5 minutes before they meet Mr. Reed, where you get a bit of an idea of
Mr.
their characters,
Reed.
and then it sort of builds them up a bit. Mr. Reed, and then it builds them up a little bit further, sort of as they're in Mr. Reed's house.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I mean we're going to end up saying a lot about Mr. Reed, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so the premise he comes to, the argument he comes up with, I guess we could discuss this first, is he
Yeah.
brings out this monopoly thing. And I think, so for me, my first major claim about this film is it would have been better not as a horror film. I would have actually rathered it be a short film and it's just the first half of the film. Right.
Before it gets more horrific.
Yeah, when he's just doing the like argument, he's just laying out
Yeah.
the argument and they're having the discussion. I'm like, this is
Well,
amazing. I love
yeah.
this. I was like, this is great. This is
He
basically a philosophy paper
yeah.
just in film form. I was like, yes, there we go. Why do we need the horror bit at the end? I knew it was coming, but I was like, I'm actually
Yeah.
just fine if you end the film here. It's interesting enough.
I mean, he one of the things which I think it does well is he's basically just lets Hugh Grant like give us some theological debates, but it's building tension the whole time it's doing that,
Mm.
and I think it's building tension really well. I think that's really good. I think that first half is really good because it's building tension very well, but then also it's kind of Hugh Grant is delivering these theological debates and he's delivering it in a very engaging sort of kind of fun way.
Mm.
It's like they were thinking, what actor could we get who could make
This
quite
not
dense
preachy. Yeah.
sort of debates fun to watch? And it's like the most charming British actor, Hugh Grant.
Yeah. I love as well how they never explain when he moved to America. Like it never comes up. Never comes up
it's
that he's
never even-
English.
Never even say that he's English.
Was
Like,
it
he's the
in
most
universe that
English-
he's not English? That's
Yeah, Mr. Reed is from New York.
yeah. So I thought the actual philosophical debate was really good because he lays it all out. And yes, I remember what I was going to say. I think famously you probably remember who talks about this, but I can't remember his name. The ticking clock, the bomb under the table.
Oh, Hitchcock.
There you go. So famously, there's an idea of the bomb under the table, which makes every scene more exciting. If you have two people having a meal, it's not that exciting. If you have two people having a meal and put a bomb under the table, it's immediately interesting. And so I think the bomb under the table of this film was knowing it's a horror film going in. Because if you didn't know that, and they didn't have the whenever anything happened,
Spooky
there was like
music.
a spooky sound. Then I think it could very easily be a film about them developing a relationship with him in they're trying to bring him into the Mormon church and he's resistant but sort of a bit interested, and so then they, not like a relationship, but have a friendship between
Yeah.
these more like it could very easily have gone in that direction for the first, I don't
Yeah.
know, 20, 30 minutes. And so, but knowing before you go in that it's not that is the bomb under the table. And so as soon as they enter the house, you're like, well, that's the end for them. And
Yeah.
it's just more like, how is it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Yeah.
Yeah. But I sort of quite like that because it's a horror film and because of the way they advertised it, you sort of yeah, you know it's probably not gonna end well. But the way it's played, the way Hugh Grant plays it is he does it really well because even when what I found funny is even when it goes horrific, fully loses that veneer. He's still sort of Hugh Grant and he's still sort of quite polite.
Yeah.
But he has moments, even in the first 20, 30 minutes, where he almost breaks it but doesn't quite.
Mm.
And like his laugh or his mannerisms, they just come across a bit off, bit wrong. And I think that I really like that. I thought that was good in building the tension at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I
and
think it. Yeah, go on.
I thought when things did kick off, whilst maybe I would have liked to see him go a bit more sort of, I don't know, a little bit less Hugh Grant. I did quite like that all these horrific things are happening, and then he's just like, "Well, I'm going to ask you some very difficult things tonight, and I'm sorry, some of them might make you want to die. I'm sorry about that." I just found
Mm.
it kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
yeah. So one of the things I liked was I was trying to work. Like I say, bomb under the table is we already know that he is evil before the film
yes,
starts, and
yes,
so the question for me was, what's he going to be evil about, right? What is his
mm,
motivation going to be? And so at the begin,
yeah,
then he's talking about monogamy, not monogamy, polygamy. I'm like, okay, is this thing he's going to kidnap them to make them his wives? Is that where this is going? And then he starts, ragging on it, and I go, oh, okay,
yeah,
so it's not that. And then it just sort of like does these things of it. Well, it could be. Oh no, it's not that.
mm,
And it was you're trying to work out
yes,
in what way is he going to be evil the whole time.
mm,
Um, yeah. It's just it's just really good.
yeah. I mean, the one thing I sort of didn't get is obviously he is evil.
Mm.
It is revealed that he is evil,
Spoilers.
and it's all about religion. Um, he's just sort of obsessed with disproving and showing religion is bad, I guess. But why has he captured so many? Why has he done all the stuff he's done just for this? I guess maybe he's just a really evil, obsessive guy, but I don't know.
Yeah. So for me, that was the big thing of when I say it got bad about halfway through, was it was
Yeah,
really interesting, and then the message is really boring, right? So for me, the ultimate argument, which and she, Sister Paxton works it out, and she says it in this thing, which is cool. That now I have a point about her working it out, but that's a separate point. It's cool that so she goes, oh, it's because you want me to know that control is the ultimate religion or whatever. And
yeah.
so the point is that religion only exists for control, which I don't think is a very interesting point, personally. I think that's a bit weak
No,
compared to what it was setting up, which I don't know what it was setting up, but it was more interesting. When we didn't find out what the point was, it was more interesting than once you found out what the point was. For me,
what Hugh Grant's one true religion was. It
yeah,
was that religion is control.
I was like, okay, that's a shame.
Mhm.
You set that up well, and then that was rubbish. For
Yeah,
me, I was like, yeah, um, yeah,
I mean, I liked it. His sort of main argument in the first half, or the main thing he keeps going on about, and he uses multiple different comparisons. He compares it to fast food, board games, and music and Star Wars.
this
But
is
he's basically arguing that religion, you know, it keeps taking multiple forms, and if there are multiple different beliefs people have. People believe different ones, different strands, which all just come from recycled stories. if all these different strands, how can one of them be sort of your thing? I guess that's sort of what he's arguing, isn't he? When he's using those, and he's compares it to fast food. He compares it to Monopoly, uh, because Monopoly sort of rips off an original board game. He says,
Mhm.
which he compares that original one to Judaism, and then he says Monopoly, the most
I
popular
love
one,
that.
that's
That Monopoly
Christianity.
scene is so good.
Yeah, and then he says Mormonism is the zany regional ripoff, and he compares it to
The Bob Ross
Bob
Monopoly.
Ross. Monopoly.
That was so
That
good
was
because I was
great.
like, I knew it was going to be some like rubbishy Monopoly, and then
That's
it's
the
the
best
Bob
one.
Ross one. Just dead funny. Yeah, and that was
Yeah.
So I think that was a really interesting argument where it was going, and I think what I wanted it to be was him going. These are all iterations on the original, and then him going, I found the original. I think that's what I wanted. Him going, oh, I found the original, and then like, it's something to do with Lilith, maybe. So Lilith was supposedly the first wife of Adam, that then was written out of the Bible during the canonization, supposedly,
Yeah.
because she refused to bow to Adam, and so something to do with that. There's the woman in there. You go, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
He's found the original version before it was corrupted by all these people. That's what I was thinking it was going to go to, and then it just didn't.
He's very I don't know, because he is throughout the whole thing he's very much against religion. I didn't believe his one true religion would actually be a religion. Like he's so against it, and he's so up for
But
deconstructing
he
it, and that
says,
is his.
I like. There's the bit where he goes, and I started looking for the one true religion, of course, and well, I hate to say that I found it. Something like that. And I'm like, oh, that was interesting. He goes, oh, I found it, but that's just, kind of sucks that I
I
found
don't
it.
know. I
I
don't
didn't see it coming.
necessarily think. Yeah, but I don't necessarily think that religion as control is an uninteresting thing to explore. I don't know.
I
I
think if
think
that's
it
what it was
has been
exploring,
used, hasn't it?
if that's what it was exploring, it would be fine.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. That was the answer to its question that it brought up. If you see what I
Yeah.
mean, like, and that as an answer is uninteresting because that's like
Mm.
you know, everyone's first critical engagement with religion is they say, "Oh, religion's just a system of control to oppress the masses." That's like
Yeah.
the first thing. If you go and study some critical analysis of religion, that is like the first thing you do.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Just control.
I mean, Nietzsche has that point, and I think it's his least interesting point as well. Yeah, and so it's like, yeah, whereas someone like Nietzsche makes lots of other claims that are sort of based around that, but are far more interesting, in-depth claims about religion. This sort of was like, okay, it's just the boring, go-to, hackneyed response, to me anyway,
Yeah,
compared to the
and I
possibility of something really interesting.
yeah, and well, I sort of agree with that. I mean, I think if it was arguing religion as control, that's not necessarily an entirely uninteresting thing to argue. But it's not like the whole thing was about that. It's like it was arguing different concepts, and then it just said, "Oh, it's control," and then didn't really
Yeah,
elaborate
because
further.
so one of his claims is that all these messiahs are the same, right? They've all got a thread that's the same, and his claim about that is that uh, well, they've all got these similarities between them, and therefore, so it seems to be saying, well, therefore there must be some nugget of truth, right? Which, like I say, would make more sense in the my version where he goes, "Oh, I found the original iteration," right? And these are all
Yeah,
variations on the original Messiah. But then he doesn't. He
yeah,
uses that as a, "Oh, well, they're all made up," which doesn't
yeah,
make sense to me because those iterations existed in
Where,
like
yeah,
he says
I
there's
guess,
there's one in Hinduism, which originated in South Asia, and then
mm,
one in like Judaism, which originates in the Middle East, which
yeah. So
weren't close at the time.
where do the original stories come from? What's the source of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, these stories which are passed on.
But he goes, oh, well,
Because
they're clearly building on each other. But I'm like, well, but multiple of these cultures weren't connected to each other. So how are they building on each other?
yeah, I mean, yeah,
Come on, you've got something to
he's
say. Hit
not
me with it.
he's not necessarily supposed to be right, is he?
I disagree.
I
I
think
think, well, go on. No, you go on.
I think he's just. I don't think. I don't think the film means to build up everything Mr. Reed says and everything he serves to say as being right. I think it means to pose different theological arguments and leave us to think, because the sort of the ending gives us one for religion. Kind of, it's like, oh well, maybe these guys are right, and I don't think it means to side with either or the Mormons in these sort of ideological things it's saying. I just think it means to bring up arguments and make us question things. I don't think it serves to say one right, this is it, if that makes sense.
I personally prefer that that the filmmakers put him as being correct, which is why I don't like that it turns into a horror film. I would much
Yeah,
prefer that he just makes his argument and then they go, oh, Mr. Reed, you're onto something here. Or I don't know. Like, I mean, that's obviously would be a rubbish ending as well. So I don't. But
yes, I
I
think
was really obviously I was really tense. But like,
yeah,
if you remove the music from that Monopoly scene, it's great. Like, it's just as in it's actually just really fun and like really interesting. Like,
yeah,
I was only tense because the music was going, the whole time and all the angles. But like, oh, I mean, when he does the creep song, I can't remember what
oh
the
yeah,
original is, but I was like, oh, I know where this is going. As soon as you start talking about the iterations, I was like, oh, yeah, I see where you're going. It was good. It was just really well built. And like I say, it is actually
yeah,
the way that scene is built is the exact same way that you would write a philosophy paper. You would bring up some abstracted version of the argument, right, which he does with the monopoly
yeah,
and the fast food, um, and then you bring it to the applied example, and it's like
yeah.
that's really cool that they did that in like an engaging way. And then it's just, and now I'm not a horror fan anyway, so for me I was like, I kind of could do without the whole horror bit. Meanwhile, I am really interested in this like philosophical argument that he's making. It's sort of ruined by all the horror crap going on. For me, that was
I, I
yeah.
yeah, I sort of disagree because, well, I liked his arguments and I thought it was entertaining, it was compelling, but I liked that the first half was a mixture of these sort of interesting arguments, but also I liked how the tension was building, and I liked that, like, whilst he's making all these arguments, sort of you're getting more and more uneasy, more like, oh, there's something, there's something a bit wrong here. I don't know. I quite like it, but maybe I like horror a bit more. Um, One thing is that when he used the song and Creep, so I also forgotten what the original song is, but he gets a song and then he says that Creep has sort of, copied this,
Mm-hmm.
and then Lana Del Rey copied it as well, and so it's like his iterations point. I That makes sense with your argument you were making that he was going to say he found the one true religion, because that has an original. That is like an original was copied and it
Mm-hmm.
was copied again. Um, but they stemmed from something, didn't they? They
Mm-hmm.
stemmed from this original song. So that makes sense with your argument that you felt it was building to him saying he discovered the original, which I guess in hindsight did feel like it was building to that, but it didn't, did it?
Yeah. Um, and it was just, yeah, like I say, I was just very unimpressed with what it did build to, and I feel like he's such an interesting character when you're like, he's so smart, right? And then,
Yeah,
but then the answer he comes up with is so like middle of the road. I was just like, I
Yeah.
don't know. I feel like you've kind of ruined the character. He's like really smart. Like his whole thing is that
Yeah.
he's read all of the things that I
Mm.
can't remember. Oh, there's a great line about the Bible. Where he goes, lots of people start, but not so many people finish it. And he's talking about food or something, but then he puts the Bible down. And I'm like, nice.
I can't quite remember.
Do you know what I mean? Do you remember that scene though? I'm like, that was cool.
Yeah.
Like, there's lots of that. Like,
Yeah.
rhetorically, he's really clever. He speaks really intelligently.
Yeah.
All the while. So, yeah. Do you have anything more to talk about on the sort of argument side of it? Because there's another interesting thing I want to bring up.
No, you go.
So, the thing I found really interesting and really cool, and I think what was the really clever part about the film that then went by it was sidelined in the second half of the film, is his argument. He says, you believe things because you believe things because it's comfortable to believe them. Right? Like, that's his argument for belief. Now, I personally
Yeah.
disagree with that as an argument for belief, but that's beside the point. Because, like I say, it's not about whether I think he's right. I think it's cool. It's more interesting if the film is presenting an argument that it's saying this is the argument as it's laid out, and here's how it
Yeah.
plays out. So whether I agree with it in relation to
Whether you
belief or
personally
not,
agree with
yeah,
it.
it's sort of irrelevant.
Yeah. It's
Um,
different. It's just how well it conveys
yeah,
it. Yeah.
because I think it's really interesting. He says this at it, and then it comes across in, he says, "Oh, my wife's just in the other room making blueberry pie," and then he keeps on repeating that, and he keeps on saying, "You're free to leave whenever you want to." And eventually,
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, I don't like when films. So, do you remember Squid Game?
I've not seen it all.
Okay, but you know the concept, right?
Yes, yeah, I do.
So the thing that disappointed me about Squid Game was it became a point where it wasn't. So the idea was, if you make it to the end, as many people, you split the money between everyone who's made it to the end. So that's the opening premise of
Yeah.
Squid Game. And then halfway through Squid Game, it becomes impossible for everyone to make it to the end because they have to kill each other, right?
Mm.
And I think that's really
Yeah.
disappointing because I think the idea that they could all make it to the end, but decide to kill each other, is a lot more interesting than
Yeah.
the idea that really only one of them can make it to the end, but they're deluded. And so that, to
Yeah.
me, at the beginning, while I was watching the film, I was like, oh, I kind of don't like that he says, oh, you're free to leave whenever you want to, because they're obviously not.
Yeah.
Whereas if he'd said that, but they'd sort of, not believed him or something, and so gone into a different route. You know what I mean? Like, if he was telling the truth, initially, I think that's more interesting. But on reflection, I don't think that's more interesting. That's a silly idea. Because what's way more interesting is the fact that he keeps on saying it, and that keeps on giving them little moments of relief, even though they
Yeah.
know that all
But
the
it's not
evidence
real.
is to the contrary, that they can leave whenever they want. And it was like
And then
it's all of those. There's the blueberry pie, right? That he
Mhm.
lies about, and they find out he lies about it, but they still are willing to engage a little bit. There's the wife
Yeah.
that he keeps on saying is just in the other room. He says, if you want me to go to the other room and ask, I will, if you really believe that my wife still
Mhm.
exists. Like he's like,
Yeah.
basically, like,
Okay.
obviously we all know that she doesn't exist, but they're still like in the mode of believing it because it's
And
comforting
would
to
like to
believe
believe
it.
it.
And then it's the
Yeah.
same thing with you can leave whenever you want to. There's just loads of that, and it's layers in. And I think that's the true message of the film, is that there's this that we all, and it doesn't have to be about religion, which I think is maybe why I find it more interesting, is it applies wider.
Yeah.
That we all have these beliefs that are comforting, and so we just accept things that people tell us because they're comforting, even if
Yeah.
all the evidence is pointing the other way.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that could apply to anything. It could apply to religion, definitely. Um, because I mean, as he says, which I thought was an interesting. There was a point where it started turning to horror. Is he's like, it is really scary, girls. The idea to accept that religion doesn't exist and that there is nothing
Hmm.
and that there is no meaning to
This
anything.
is both a scary, yeah.
That is terrifying. Um, and so I guess that fits into the argument that it's comforting to believe, and to think that there is something there. Um, and yeah, you are right. That is more interesting than just him being like, "Ah, I was controlling you all along. It's all control."
Yeah, and I think so. The other one that I think is really interesting is he keeps on bringing up the fact that this looks like he's going to kill them, right? He goes, "Oh, I know how this looks. Older guy, two young women."
Yeah, he says that once or twice. Yeah.
You know, he keeps on bringing it up because that's what if I was in that scenario and I was like, "Oh, I've somehow found myself in this scenario and I'm not a serial killer," I would also be like,
Yeah.
"I get that this looks bad.
Looks bad.
My front door doesn't
Yeah.
work. You have to go out this back door that looks like a basement. Like I would also be prefacing, but then so he keeps on bringing it up, but then we know that he is actually a serial killer, and
Yeah.
it looks bad because it is bad,
Because
right?
and it was advertised as a horror film, so
Yeah.
we're not really being kidded. We know where it's
Well,
gonna
we're
go.
not, but I think I'm like, that's the thing. Because of Hugh Grant's performance, I was like, maybe he's not evil. Like I kept having to remind myself that it was a horror film because every time he said it, I was like, yeah, that does. He's probably not then, because he keeps on saying it, and but the way he kept on
Yeah.
bringing it up, like, oh, I know this looks bad, but I promise it's fine. It's just an odd series. It's just a coincidence that it's just a bit weird. But then it wasn't a
Yeah.
coincidence. Like I don't know. That just really fit with the whole like comforting lie thing of even when he was telling them the truth that it looks bad, right? It looks really weird, because it is really weird. But as he's telling them that, that's comforting because it's even though it's a lie. Just that whole,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah, that would be more interesting than
yeah,
the revelation we got at the end.
yeah. Well, I think it is
Um,
in the film, so
yeah,
he gets points
definitely.
for it. I don't
Yeah.
think it, and I don't think it gives up on that
Yeah.
idea either.
No. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
But it's just not what it becomes about.
Hmm.
Because yeah, the control thing he says it's all about. Um, yeah, I guess you could say that is an example of him controlling them sort of not quite wanting to believe. Um, them choosing to accept what he's saying. They don't want to believe what they realize may be the truth. I guess you could put that into the control argument, but you're right. That's a more interesting argument in of itself than that it's all just about him controlling
Hmm.
and about religion as control.
Yeah,
Um,
and so yeah. Do you have any more to say on this?
no, which point do you want to move on to next?
So, uh, another thing that I thought was so one of my fixes for the film. So let's take a step back and look at the characters. So there's Sister Paxton, who is this very innocent, raised in the Mormon Church clearly, and a bit like uncritical, and sort
Yeah,
of a bit more airheaded than Sister Barnes. And she
I
sort
mean,
of,
seemingly.
well, this is the thing. I don't think it is seemingly in
Yeah,
the first half, in the first act of the film. I think that is who she is. I don't think she's not unintelligent, but she's not. She's clearly not as like turned on to the world.
yeah, but
Like she.
yeah,
I
it is revealed that she's been very, very sort of switched on and observant
see.
the whole
This is the
time.
thing.
There
I
was,
think that's a bit rubbish because I don't think that is in her
yeah,
character. In up until Sister Barnes gets killed, and she says
yeah,
challenge. She says to herself, challenge him. Up until that
yeah,
point, she's not, and maybe that is a comment on, okay, well, she would, she's playing a role all life. She's playing a role of the Mormon wife, right?
yeah,
And she is always really been turned on, turned on to what's happening in the world, and she is really engaged with it, but she's
Yeah.
playing this role. Which maybe, but I don't think there's any evidence for it in the first half of the film. I think she is a bit ditzy. Compared to
Yeah,
Sister
yeah.
Barnes, who's really not. She clearly is turned on, right?
Yeah,
She's
she's really clever.
pin sharp. Uh,
Al- Although you could argue that, well, while Sister Barnes clearly is very intelligent, clearly is very sort of pin sharp, as you've said, um, one thing in which she isn't intelligent is that she does make it quite clear that she's she is very clever, and that she's onto Hugh Grant, and she you know, sort of what's the word, telegraphs to herself and makes it quite clear that she is looking, and she's constantly thinking of ways to get out of it. Showcases that quite clearly. Um, Whereas Sister Paxton doesn't, and it's not set up that she's actually clever, so we believe that's just because she's who she is. But then it takes a turn and sort of says actually she's been the smartest one the whole time, sort of, doesn't it?
yeah, and so my change to it, because I don't like either. You have to set her up as being a bit more with it
Yes.
up
Yeah.
until that point.
Or yeah, I mean, I agree with that.
Yeah. Or so my now I think that's boring. I think the much more interesting one. Either sorry, there's three options. You set it up better at the beginning, worst option. Second option, you make the film half an hour longer and she actually grows into a, like it takes her a while to get there, but eventually she can
Yeah.
stand up to him intellectually. It takes her a
Yeah.
while to put it together, but eventually can. The bit where she's working out how he did the magic trick, right? You say that's like, if that takes her the rest of the film, and then she says at the end, that makes more sense, because yeah, she probably is, well educated, like she probably is actually intelligent. She's just been like sleepwalking a bit, would be my
Yeah.
thing. So that's one. I think the most interesting one is she dies, right? So when Hugh Grant kills Sister Barnes, quote
Yeah.
unquote, instead he kills Sister Paxton, who could have just been like a bit more of a side character. And then Sister Barnes, who's already been set up to be really intelligent, then carries on being really intelligent, right? Because
I don't think that's.
Sister Paxton is, her character after Sister Barnes' death is exactly what Sister Barnes was before, right? Like they're exactly the same character now. You could literally replace, you could change 0 lines and replace which actor gets killed, and the film makes more sense.
I don't know if they're exactly the same character. They're quite similar. They sort of serve the same function.
But that's the thing, they don't. In the beginning of the film, they don't serve the same function.
Yeah, I think out of the three options you've picked, I think the second one for me is the most interesting, because we expect Paxton to be the one who dies. That is what we predict, because Barnes is set up as more intelligent. She's sort of set up as the more primary figure out of the two. In that moment, we would expect it to be Paxton who dies. So it being Barnes is a bit of a twist. It's a bit of a subversion. We're like, oh, we don't expect this.
I will give you that. It was shocking. Yeah.
Yeah. And whilst Paxton with suddenly being like, I'm actually really bright. I was actually the most intelligent of the two. I've just been sort of playing my cards close. I've been observing everything. Isn't pulled off in a way in which it's entirely convincing. I think if it was done in a way that she did grow, and that was convincing, I think that would be the best option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't.
Yeah,
Go on.
You are right.
Sorry, I did want to hear you say that. That was why I let you finish, so I could hear you say I was right.
In that Sister Paxton's change, it doesn't entirely hold up.
Yeah,
doesn't entirely make sense.
And I think what contributed to it, a bit of the confusion as well around that period, was when the quote unquote dead lady, which also that whole thing didn't really make sense. It's like,
that doesn't quite make
sense. Why was it entailed in his religion, his control thing, that he had to keep all these women locked up in cages? You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
well,
Like,
because he's controlling them. It's like a showcase of his control.
no, I get that, but it was like, why are they women? Wasn't really like it's probably some, you know, oh well, religion primarily subjugates women, probably something like that. But then that wasn't really the point of the film. So then why are they all? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's
I
sort
think
of
it
like
was
half
that.
made a point, but not
Yeah,
didn't really. I don't know. Like that should have been more of a part of the because then he doesn't. He talks a little bit about polygamy, which is one of the ways that Mormonism would have subjugated women. But then it doesn't. He doesn't really talk about the rest of it. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like he
I
doesn't. He doesn't bring
also,
up any other examples. So it seems like
yeah,
that wasn't a focus of the film. But then a key plot point result. I don't know. Go on.
yeah. Um, I mean, I guess he is the whole film controlling these and messing about these two women. And as you said, he does make these points, being like, "Oh, older man, two women." I guess sort of, but yeah, you're right. It doesn't really entirely set that up. But my problem more with the whole he's got these women all locked up is more the sort of logical aspects of it, in which it doesn't make sense. It's like obviously they've all been abused
Mm-hmm.
and kept in the same way, but why would they all look exactly the same um, as each other? They
Yeah.
look they
And then
look
why?
exactly the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah, it's odd, and then also like there was some things about the practicalities of the whole thing. So
Yeah.
one of the things was, which isn't a big deal, but them sort of there are two of them, and at various points they do have weaponry, right?
Hmm.
And he doesn't. He has a what do you call it?
Yeah.
A thingy knife, like a cardboard cutter knife, whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Um, like that's it he has for weaponry. And so like when they're in the room, so for example when they're standing by the two doors, there's a candle, there's like a candelabra next to them,
Yeah.
and at this point they're pretty suspicious of them. Why doesn't one of them pick up the candelabra? Because
Yeah. True.
like, you know what I mean, like it takes quite a while for them to try and physically attack him, and I get that he's a man and so he could even probably overpower them both, but they don't really try. They just sort of resign themselves pretty easily.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I don't know. That bit just seemed a little bit odd to me. Of like, there's an ash. I remember there being an ashtray, like a glass ashtray, and I'm like, these are if
Yeah.
I was in this situation, these would be the things I would be thinking. Oh, okay. Well, if I need to attack this guy, because he's still old as well. It's not like he's,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, I would at least. I think there's at least a chance that they could have physically taken him down. You know?
Yeah. And I mean the one point in which I was like, logically this doesn't make sense is so when he says religion is control, he's basically revealed that he's sort of predicted everything they're
Mm-hmm.
doing. He's been observing them, all been part of his plan. This has all gone to plan, all been his control. He's super smart.
Well, it's sort of gone
Sort
to
of
plan.
everything they're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The whole
Um,
simulation thing was also a bit weird, but yeah, go on.
it's all pretty much gone to plan. He sort of predicted everything. He's been controlling them this whole time. Basically, what he says, and then the way in which he gets the upper hand, how he wouldn't have predicted that going up to her and being creepy, bearing in mind, she's had this weapon at some point before, going up to her being all creepy and stuff and getting close in, why she wouldn't just stab him in the face. Like,
So
how
I
did
don't
he
think he
not?
knows that she has the weapon,
Yeah,
right?
I lost track of the weapon as it went
I
on.
agree. There's a scene when Barnes gets killed. She says the magic underwear, right? And then he kills her.
Yeah,
And so that's the point at which Sister Paxton is supposed to kill Thingy. And I think that either it should have been made clear that she didn't have the stones to kill him, which seems to be what's implied up until that point, right? Like she's not actually sure whether she could bring herself to murder
yeah,
him.
yeah,
or she should have tried to kill him, right? But where it's not clear. It seems like she went for it. He kills her, and then she just like gives up, which seems a bit odd, given that he's now become more of a threat. You know, you would think you would just carry through with it, and so it's not.
She takes it. I thought he took it out of her hand.
That's the thing. I thought, okay, there must have been some
Bart.
weird. No, it's a different knife. I thought it was like, I don't know. I thought it was a weird cut. It was a confusing scene, which didn't, because she pulls it out of her pocket and then we don't see it again.
Yeah.
So I just assumed that he knocks it out of her hand or something. Like, I assumed that she doesn't have it anymore. And then he got close and I was like, oh, okay, she's probably going to kill him with the thing. But I was pretty sure she'd got rid of it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I lost track of that. But I think if he's so smart and so overseeing, that feels like quite a big overstep.
Yeah, why would you leave?
And it wasn't
let her
one
open a line around.
Yeah, for such a crucial moment in where she gets the upper hand, it felt like it wasn't really set up. It's like she just did it. It wasn't really set up as to how she had it, whether he knew she had it or whether not. She just sort of did it. It felt like for the big point where she gets the upper hand on Mr. Reed, there should have been more set up for that, if that makes sense.
I also didn't like, so in terms of, while we're still on like logical things that didn't really make sense, the pastor goes to visit him. Fair enough, you know, he doesn't think there. He should then go to the next person on their list, right? Who they would have seen. So then, and would have left. So they would have said, oh no, they left 6 hours ago or whatever. At which point you then go, okay, well, it makes logical sense that they went to either something happened to them on the road, or they got to that guy's house and they're in there. You know what I mean? Like, why did the pastor never come back? If I was looking for them, I would go back to the, you know, if I've gone to the first lot. Now, it is Hugh Grant, and Hugh Grant was very convincing. So, you know.
And charming, yes. But was Reed last on the list?
He's second. So the pastor goes to someone first, right? And he says, oh, have you seen them? And they say, we never saw them at all. So you go, right, well, they didn't make it to this address. So he goes to the one before them, which is Mr. Reed. And he says he's never seen them. So you go, okay, so they must not have made it to this address. Although, again, why are you trusting the creepy old man? But sure. So then he should go to the one before Mr. Reed, and they would say, yes, they came to see us, and they left, blah, blah, blah. Right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, true.
At which point he should then call the police to Mr. Reed's house and say, you were the next person they were coming to see. You know what I mean? Like, and we just see none of that. At least if there was like the police arriving in the morning. So they couldn't have helped anything up until that point. But, you know, eventually they get their warrant or whatever. And then they arrive. But by that point, it's already too late. Nothing. We don't get anything.
That was a weird thing. Because we did get a few scenes of the pastor back at the church. And then him going out on the search. And they ultimately didn't lead anywhere. And that was weird that we did spend a little bit of time with him. And it was like, what's the point in these scenes with him? Being sort of, you know, having as much time as they did, if it has absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I mean, like,
he literally just goes to the door, is charmed by Hugh Grant, and then leaves, and that is it, and that is all it needed to be.
It seemed like it set up the control point with the bike lock. I think that's the main point of it, right? Is it was just so then we could go, where have the bikes gone? Oh, and then it starts the ticking, right? Which is good. It's good that they actually planned ahead. When he arrives, there's no bikes there anymore.
Yeah.
You know? And so that's good. But equally, like I say, especially when the whole reason he has a list of who they're going to see is for this very this very situation. It seems odd that then he doesn't. Yeah. There is no like follow up. You know, he doesn't call the Mormon Brigade to start knocking down doors. It's just him, and he must have goes, oh well, guess they went home or something.
Yeah,
I don't like it's yeah. So there was some things like that which sort of didn't really track for me. Um, yeah, and then yeah. So there's one more character point on Sister Paxton that I didn't really love. So at the end,
Yeah.
uh, she stabbed him. He's bleeding out. He's stabbed her. Also, how long he survives with a hole in his face. Don't love that, but whatever.
No.
Um, I mean, forget him. How long Sister Barnes survives?
Yeah,
Like,
I think part of that though was that was supposed to be like an actual miracle because
that was
he
the
has
thing.
the
I was
health.
like, has she
Yeah.
actually come back to life?
I think that was supposed to be ambiguous. I think it was, is this an actual miracle? I think that's generally what it
I
was
think that was
supposed to
probably what
be.
it is. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I
you're
think
right.
that's what it is because his whole thing is he's staging miracles to show that God isn't real. And so this Mormon girl basically coming back to consciousness after 20 minutes or half an hour, however long it
Mm-hmm.
is, being what we presume is dead, is like a miracle. And so I think it's, as I said at the end of the film, I think it gives a couple of things in favor of faith, being like, oh, he does
Mm-hmm.
exist.
Yeah,
I
but
think
so
that was one of
yeah.
those.
So this is the bit that then I wasn't a big fan of is uh, Sister Paxton. Then he
Yeah,
says, "Pray for us." He's like, "Pray for us." He's bleeding out, and Sister Paxton says, "Prayer doesn't work." And I was like, oh, because then the point was this whole again, which doesn't. It would have been a better line coming out of Barnes. It
mm,
makes more sense coming out of Barnes's mouth because she's sort of or seems clearly more on the fence. If
yeah,
she go, then she goes, oh, prayer doesn't work. They did a prayer experiment, blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, so the point of it is she actually never really believed in God. She just believes that this is a, you know, the Mormon church is a net good for community living or something. And I'm like,
yeah,
it's what atheists believe, or it's what many atheists believe is true about Christians or religious people in general. They go, oh well, they probably don't really believe it. They want some way of pretending that you don't die when you die, or it's mainly just about the community feeling. I think that that's definitely a view in a lot of atheist communities, is that religious people don't actually believe what they say they believe.
yeah,
And that's what this was. It was, oh, this character who's supposedly very devout Mormon actually doesn't really believe any of it. She just thinks that, and I was like, oh, I don't know, it was just another one which was just like, oh, that's not interesting.
yeah, yeah, and sort of, yeah, against Paxton's character, I guess.
Yeah. Whereas it would have
But
been better if
then,
Paxton, right, who has a lot of faith, then comes
yeah,
back and is the one that kills. She seems like the weak one, but in the end, she's the
mm,
one who can summon the strength to murder him. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
true,
To me, it just seems very obvious that these roles should have been switched.
yeah. But I mean, that's why it does it, because it would be obvious to the audience that Paxton is the one who gets taken out, and Barnes is the one who's got to continue doing the smarting. So that's why they've made that decision to subvert our expectations. But I think you're right about the prayer thing. Um, I mean, obviously, I come from a different perspective from it. To sort of have Paxton be like, "Oh, I don't know if I fully believe," feels like fundamental sort of, yeah, like
Yeah.
stripping of her character, I
Well,
guess.
yeah, I wouldn't mind if it was, um, if
Barnes.
she said, no, well, yeah, I definitely wouldn't mind if it was Barnes because it makes sense. But even if Paxton goes, um, oh, maybe you're right. Maybe prayer doesn't work. Like maybe it's a concession she's made from this, how could this happen to me? Crisis of faith
Yeah,
moment. But it's not. She has this study like locked and loaded,
mm,
and so it's like,
yeah, she does.
oh, I
Well,
would,
I
yeah,
guess,
yeah, go on.
I guess the very first scene of the film sort of establishes that both of them might have some doubts, but don't know how interesting that is because it's literally a conversation about sex, um,
I don't think that's Paxton having
pornography.
doubts. I think that is a
No,
very.
but she's clearly watched it.
That's the thing. I think it's a very like. I think that's sort of a very religious community thing of
Yeah,
people struggling with something like that, right? Because it's not that she agrees that it's good, right? It's that
no,
it's that she is like she's fighting against the feeling that it's good, right? Which is
yes, yeah,
that's a religious idea, is that you should fight your
yeah,
like instincts. And so but that's sort of a very yeah, I like that scene because it's like very clear what's going on in it. You know, it's clear
yeah,
that she hasn't stumbled. I don't know where I saw it. You know, like that was a good line. It's
yeah,
very obvious, but that she feels the need to cover it up shows that she is. You know, and again, that bit played a bit more like her performing, but then it wasn't really kept up. So yeah,
yeah, yeah. But I guess that sort of could have set it up, yeah, if it kept it up a bit.
if she
Um,
was more if she was more obviously playing a role, then it would have made more sense. And the further you know, the more things are obviously going wrong, the less of the role she can keep up because she's like, I actually need to confront reality instead of living in a dream world. If that's what
yeah,
happened, it doesn't. But I just love it so much. She's just the actress who, I mean, maybe she's just like this in reality, which is then less impressive. But I don't just was played it so well. Like you know that bit where he goes, "Oh well, I think Joseph Smith used polygamy to cover up his misogynistic tendencies towards that whole thing."
mm,
I was like, "Yeah, that was also an interesting argument, which is obviously true
yeah,
because Mormonism is nonsense, but just is. But fine.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I do like as well how it didn't pull its punches with any of it, right?
No.
Like
Uh,
it. Um, but
anyway,
they
you were talking about Paxton.
yeah. So Paxton then goes, uh, "Oh, I'm not really sure where you're getting that from," which is like you get when you see religious people who aren't necessarily as clued up on arguments as they might like to be, right?
Yeah,
You will always get that response where they go, "Oh, I'm not sure quite where you're getting that," and it's because then that they would
yeah,
say, "Oh, well, that's not true," blah blah blah, right? But the "I'm not quite sure
yeah.
where you're getting that" means I don't really know how to respond to this, but it makes me uncomfortable, so I'm gonna say I'm not sure. It was, but the way she acted, it was just perfect. Like I've seen people say that in the exact way before. I was like, "Oh, that's chef's kiss," like.
I mean, one of the things you can say about this film is all three of them are really good actors.
Just insanely good. Yeah, and like I say,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
they are just like
Well, they were actually Mormons, but
yeah.
yeah,
The hard thing when you see an actor for the first time is this just what they're like? So Hugh Grant, great actor. Also, that is just what he's like, right?
yeah. I mean, he's playing something different,
Like the
but
reason why
he's
he's so
not
charming, even though we
entirely
know he's a
selling it.
serial killer, is because at the end of the day, he's not a serial killer. He is still Hugh Grant.
He is Hugh Grant, and Hugh Grant is very charming. Yeah,
Yeah. Um.
yeah.
So maybe they,
Seen,
yeah, but it seems like they're
have you
very good actors.
have you seen Hugh Grant talk about his films? You
No.
need to watch it because that's just him. Obviously
Yeah, it
not
doesn't surprise me.
the
Yeah.
serial killer, but he's exactly how you would imagine him to be.
Yeah, you just feed different
Like,
lines into him. That's why he's not that. He is really creepy, but only because of the music. If you take away the music, he's again not that. I think I would have been convinced that he wasn't going to kill me up until the
I
point that
think
he
he's
kills me.
doing I think he's doing some creepy stuff with his performance, but ultimately he doesn't step out of what I would expect from him.
Oh,
As I said,
rightfully
it's sort
so.
of
Yeah.
it's and it's creepy because he's doing all of this horrible stuff. He's being like, "Oh well, I'm sorry," but and he's doing it in the most Hugh Grant way possible, which sort of, in a weird way, like works in this film.
It
I
feels like
think
it was
him,
definitely written with him in mind.
yeah, yeah, or they altered it for him. But
Mm-hmm.
I think he improved a little bit of it.
Just improv the whole
Um,
film. Actually, it was a fly on the wall film.
mm.
It's
Actually,
actually a documentary.
this was based on an experience I
Yeah,
once had when two Mormons came and knocked on my door.
this was the fantasy I had to get them out of my house.
Well,
Have you ever heard
I've
of
always
Jehovah's
wanted
Witnesses?
to do this to Jehovah's Witnesses. So I thought when they said, "You we're doing a film with Mormons," I was like, "Yes, let's do that."
Yeah, I did. I also did like that they used Mormons instead of, like they feel like a more easily dunked upon group. It felt less
Yeah,
offensive because Mormonism is
yeah.
inherently a bit silly. Uh,
Well, I mean,
I would say no offense to Mormons, but it is. So,
it is offensive to them, poor guys. But
well, it is
South
offensive and
Park,
also is a silly religion. So,
yeah, South Park did an episode where it was a Judgment Day episode in South Park, and so everyone ended up in hell. And then a punchline in the joke was everyone was like, right, so we've all ended up in hell. Which religion was right? Which one was it who got it right? They were like, it was the Mormons.
that's funny.
They were right all along.
Oh, there is,
It's
yeah,
funny because it's Mormonism.
yeah. There was a good line about the Book of Mormon as well, where like there's
Oh yeah,
thing is, it must have been written, I think, by either they provided some insight or it was written by religious people, by Christians. It must have been because there's so many things where you go like, yes, that's yeah. Um,
yeah,
Maybe I noticed it more than you, but so the Book of Mormon bit where she goes, oh, that that South Park Book of Mormon, and then Sister Barnes goes, oh, there are some good songs in it though, they're quite funny. I'm like, yes, I've
yeah,
heard that exact thing. They go, oh, I don't agree with it, but some of the songs are quite funny. I've literally
yeah,
heard that exact thing come out of people's mouths, and like, oh, there was so many moments like that where I was just like, yeah, you've actually hit the nail on the head in a non yeah, these aren't the most flattering impressions, but equally they're not like caricatures. Like these are these are
yeah. I feel you.
it's not a caricature because I've seen it have said so much.
Yeah, I mean, if it was written by religious people, would I don't know, would you write something which inherently poses a lot of arguments questioning
I think
um something you believe in? Because it wasn't just Mormonism, it was religion as a
mm,
whole
I think it
was
must have
what
been an
Hugh
ex
Grant.
ex religious person. I think
Yeah,
it must have been. Yeah.
because if you, yeah, I mean, you wouldn't do like
I wouldn't
someone
write this
religious
book,
wouldn't.
this film.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
wasn't.
you
I
wouldn't
was.
write
I was
some.
trying to work out now how can I square these well-made arguments in my head against what I believe, and I did. I worked out why he was wrong. It's fine. I've got my
Yeah,
theology is secure, but
yeah,
I was a little bit like, is this the day I stop believing? From
yeah.
Heretic the film, has Hugh Grant
I
ruined
was
my life? Uh,
I was slightly worried after I watched it. I was like, Noah's gonna watch this. He is religious. What is he gonna think? I didn't think that because you're very you're very you definitely do believe in it. You're very strong and believe in it. Um, I didn't think it would actually make you question properly, but a part of me was like, oh, what's he gonna
I was
think
worried.
that
I was like, oh,
I've just gone and watched a film which like fundamentally just tries to rip apart these things or has a character who does.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
I welcome it. If you like, if that does shake your faith, then you probably needed to do some more work before watching it, so I didn't mind it.
Mm.
But it did take me a little bit of time to work out how I was gonna solve the arguments, and I was like, okay, it's fine. I've worked it out. It's all right. He is wrong, and I could write about it if I needed to. But I was like, oh, he is compelling. It is Hugh Grant, you know.
He's so charming.
If anyone could do it, it's like him and Matt Berry. Oh,
yeah. It's like, as I said, no other actor could really. I don't know, maybe some actors, but you needed an incredibly watchable actor to have you sit there and be like, yes, I am gonna watch this guy just talk in depth about philosophical arguments and then compare it to Jar Jar Binks. Like, yes. No.
Oh, that was so good. There was a few moments where I was laughing and no one else was laughing in the room. Jar Jar Binks was one of them.
I thought it was funny.
So
I thought there were
awful,
moments
yeah.
where it was funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where he's like, hello, religion is just story after story.
You know, are people in the
Star
future going to
Wars.
believe that Jar Jar Binks was a prophet? Jar Jar Binks, me sir, prophet. It's such a bad Jar Jar impression as well. Jar Jar.
I know, but because it's Hugh Grant and he goes after it. Never mind, in the most Hugh Grant way, you just sort of like dismiss how bad it was.
There was so many cultural references in there that I'm like, this does age the film, but are 100% worth it. They're not even like.
But they were really quite good. Like a lot of films which do cultural references, it's just like, cliched and it's just like tiring. But Heretic had pretty fucking good.
They were really unique cultural references, I think, which was interesting. So one of my main gripes is whenever things reference a culture, whenever people do cultural references in films, they have like a go-to of the top 5. So they'll go, they'll do something about I'm your father, for instance, right? Like, there's a bit in Pitch Perfect. I was talking about it today with some people at work. There's a bit in Pitch Perfect where she goes, oh, Vader literally means father. How did you not see it? And I'm like, oh, okay, who cares? That's such like a boring, cliched thing. Whereas you're right, the specifics that they picked are so unique to this film that it's good. Yeah, it's good.
It's fun. I mean, another funny thing I found is sort of I think it's one of the first main points when he really starts like underpinning things, to the point where you're like, why is this guy underpinning things so much and questioning their religion, is when he mentions polygamy. I thought the way he built to that was quite funny. Maybe just because it's Hugh Grant, but he's like, "No, I'm sorry. I've got a little bit of a question. I hope it doesn't make you too uncomfortable." And he's like, "Drum roll, please. How do you feel about polygamy?"
Oh, the drum roll bit as well.
Yeah. That was awkwardly realistic, wasn't it?
That's the thing. They just did so much cringe so well. It wasn't the film that was cringe. It was like when he does the Jar Jar is mega cringe, but it's not the film that's cringe. It's him that's being a bit weird. And like, when she does the drum roll and does it like the weirdest drum roll you've ever seen. You know what I mean?
It's
like, there's no reason she had to do it on her belly. She could have done it on her legs, on the sofa, anything. But she does like, and it's because she's sort of she's a fun-go-lucky. She's like, oh, I'll do it. Oh, and it's, I don't know. It was just so good. I will request a drum roll. Yeah, very good. Right. Well, I feel like we've exhausted most of the film. Have you got anything?
No, I think we've covered most of it.
All right, lovely. Right, should we give it a rank?
Yes.
Okay. I actually don't know. I was thinking like, I think because the second plot is so boring, right? As soon as it turns into the horror thing, I was like, I just don't really care. But then when we've been talking about it, I really like it. There's so many things about it I like. Yeah.
I disagree with you, because the second half doesn't make sense, but I was scared. I was really scared by it. So I was too busy being scared to really care about much else. And it is a horror, and it's supposed to do that.
That is, do make a good argument.
I'd go no lower than B.
I think as well, yeah. So one of the things is I am usually really scared of horror things, and I was scared whilst in the cinema, right? Like I felt very uncomfortable whilst in the cinema.
Yeah.
Felt like, oh yeah, this is good. This am I going to be worried walking home? And I was a bit. I was pretty wary on my way back home. I was sort of like, shiftily
Yeah.
looking at people.
Me too. I was like,
But
God, is Hugh Grant gonna
yeah,
jump out at me?
but
Start.
since I've not really been that worried. Whereas usually it would stick with
Yeah.
me for like a week. Like
Really?
I was more scared. I watched, Midnight, the episode of Doctor Who where he gets stuck in a van.
Oh yeah,
On
great episode.
right, I was more scared of that
Yeah.
episode than I was of this film. Like after
Really?
I watched it, because I'm like, oh, that's a bit more terrifying, and so for me it was good, but I think it was more of a thriller than it was a horror film. Like I think
Yeah.
I wasn't really worried. I think because the messaging was more interesting than the horror, and the horror was pretty restricted. There wasn't really that much. He chops that girl's finger off, he kills Barnes, and then he stabs Paxton.
Yeah.
But that's about it in terms of violence. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't.
Yeah.
It's sort of more
I think you can.
psychologically horrifying.
Yeah, but I think that's quite good as well. I think
I'm not
horror
saying
doesn't
that's a bad thing. Yeah, I just.
certainly. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I don't know. I thought the second half, it sort of did get worse, and it didn't entirely make sense. On a logical and sort of theoretical level. As I said, it scared me enough and it gripped me enough to which I wasn't worrying about that at the time. Um, the first half probably was more interesting. I was, on an emotional level, it worked, as I said at the beginning. It did scare me. Um, so I don't know. That scared me more than Midnight.
Yeah, fair.
Uh,
So you think a
but
B?
what level?
I came away from it just
I
so
wouldn't.
disappointed with what happened. Like halfway through,
Yeah,
but then it
I
was
wouldn't
so
go lower
fun.
than a B.
I couldn't go
Yeah,
lower than a B.
I wouldn't want to. We could compromise.
I feel like Lee was Lee better? No, Lee was kind of.
No,
I don't know.
Lee wasn't
Lee
better
had.
than that. Lee didn't make sense, and Lee wasn't that fun.
This is true. This is true. Heretic did
This,
make more sense
it,
than Lee.
yeah, and was like way more fun.
And
Like,
they
what would you
they did a
rather?
really good job of setting up loads of things as well.
Exactly. Yeah,
Except for
I
the
think
main
Heretic's
character,
better than
it's
Lee.
set up very poorly. But
Yes, I'd say Heretic's better than Wild Robot as well.
oh, I, I don't. I see. I've been tainted by our conversation because this has been one of the most fun films to talk about.
Yeah.
But does that
Well,
mean
we
it
thought
doesn't
it
mean
would
it's a
be.
doesn't mean yeah we did, but doesn't mean it's a good film.
Yeah, well, I thought it was. I don't know, maybe that's my influence.
I don't know. I was thinking like D
D.
like after I watched it I was like, oh, that was kind of rubbish. But halfway through I was like, there was a moment that my brain was like, oh, this is really interesting, really interesting. Oh, I'm bored. Like there was a moment my brain switched to this isn't that interesting anymore. And after
Yeah,
that
well,
point I was like, oh, it's probably going to be in a D or a C.
yeah,
But then we've been talking about it and I'm like, oh, that was so fun.
exactly. It probably deserves a rewatch. But I
It
think if
deserves
we
a
rewatched,
rewatch. I watched it 2 days ago.
yeah, I watched it 5 days ago.
I could actually do
But
without rewatching it for a while, to be honest.
I think if I rewatched it, it might have the opposite effect because for that second half I was scared, and
You'll
so
be
that meant
analysing it a
that
bit more because you know what's coming.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I wasn't analyzing it as much. I was too busy being scared, and so that meant that I enjoyed it, and it had the effect on me that it wanted to. So that's why I wouldn't put it any lower than a B.
Because right now I'm like, yeah, it was the most enjoyable out of all the films we've watched.
Well,
But
Paddington 3.
it's such recency bias. I can't like, because I kind of want to put it. So you're swaying me. I want to put it higher than Wild Robot because you've swayed me. But equally, I don't want to put it higher than Wild Robot because I would rather watch. I wouldn't rather watch Wild Robot again.
really want to watch.
No, I
I didn't
don't.
love
But I
Wild
feel like
Robot.
I
I thought Wild Robot
will.
was a bit boring.
I feel like I won't rewatch Heretic, and I probably will rewatch Wild Robot at some
Whereas
point.
I would definitely rewatch Heretic, but probably not Wild Robot.
I don't know. I don't know what to do.
You know my opinion. It's your choice.
I think we're gonna do it. I'm gonna follow you for now, and
Okay.
it might have to revisit it in
Yep.
future
Okay.
weeks, which I know we say every week, but yeah, like that.
Yeah.
Which does mean that
Yeah.
Hugh Grant is in the top two of the five films we've seen,
Yeah. That's probably my influence
and the third is Matt Berry, which I feel like we might be a little bit biased.
towards those
But I
Brits.
really love Adam Driver, so and we put Megalopolis in the
Well,
so
that was deserved. Megalopolis was rubbish.
that was deserved.
Yeah, Megalopolis was rubbish, wasn't
El
it?
Garbagio. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm happy
Well,
with that.
but are you sure?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, great.
Well, that was Heretic.